Hello and welcome to this review of my iGK61, a kit keyboard from MonkeyKing that I got in the mail a few weeks ago, way ahead of schedule thankfully. It's a 60% poker layout keyboard with hot swappable switch sockets, and I bought it as a test bed to test new switches out in. And to kick off, we're finally taking a look at NovelKeys' new BOX Royal switches. Previously, I've shown Project Kailh, which is a G83000 I decked out with Kailh BOX Whites, and Project N, a Wise WY50 I put BOX Navies in, but I was getting a bit tired of sacrificing a chassis every time a new switch got released, never mind the soldering and desoldering work involved in doing so, so I asked around and someone from the Dutch keyboard community suggested this one to me. The iGK61 was available as loose parts or several kit types from PC100, and I basically got the kit that had everything in it except the switches, because of course that was the whole point of this exercise. At only $44.50 it's really cheap, especially for a hot swappable keyboard. Arguably the most well-known and first hot swappable keyboard is the glorious Gaming Modular Mechanical Keyboard, or GMMK. That one goes for upwards of $100, which I really didn't want to spend on such a project, but $45 is much more manageable. The board's got all the standard gaming bells and whistles, 1000 Hz polling rate, full N-key rollover over USB, a Win key lock and RGB backlighting. It even has a built-in mic to which the backlight can respond, like this. The more sound it detects, the further the lighting goes on the board. You can program all sorts of light and layout shite into it. In fact, the whole board is 4 fully programmable layers, but to be honest, I couldn't be bothered with that and just used it as is. It comes pre-programmed with the layout that's on the caps and a few lighting effects, and frankly, that's good enough for me, certainly for a testbed keyboard. It comes with a coloured ABS case, for this one I went with black, and a painted metal mounting plate. It has a very small rim on it that gives it barely any more protection than a case with a floating switch design, and at 570 grams including switches it's very light. It was clearly meant more for portability than durability. That said, of course, if I wanted to go for a particularly tough small keyboard, I wouldn't use this or any other gaming keyboards. I'd bring out the big guns. You can get it with cherry or Gateron switches of various flavors, and for an extra 50 to 60 you can have the case in colored anodized aluminium. The caps might look familiar to some of you. The rather ugly but highly distinctive stenciled lettering kind of gives it away. They're a variation of the same caps that are also on the Ace PowerTech Hall Effect keyboards, which are double-shot PBT, which is very durable indeed, but as it happens, it's also one of the absolute cheapest keycap sets you can get, at a little bit over €10 shipped. The ones that come with the iGK61 are not PBT, but ABS, and they have curiously sharp corners and very smooth sides. They get dirty real fast as well, but hey, whatever. If you don't like the caps, you can just order the kit without them and stick on some caps of your liking. I don't mind so much anyway, because some recent reports have shown that box switches use a mount that's ever so slightly wider than normal cherry mount, and this has resulted in people's keycaps getting stretched, damaged, or even broken off. So I'm not going to use any expensive caps on this, although the caps that came with this keyboard don't seem visibly affected at least. To test this further, I examined the caps that have been on projects K and N for several months, and on these I can't see any traces of damage either, but unfortunately several dozen of the SA Dasher caps that I put on the BOX Navies do show damage, ranging from mild stretching to pretty severe, which is really bad as these are among my favourite and certainly are my most expensive keycaps. What I'm taking away from this is 2 things. First of all, not all cap sets seems to suffer equally by the box mount, and second, don't use any expensive keycaps with them. Now for the switches, they are NovelKeys BOX Royal switches, and I've already done a teardown video of them detailing their construction, but not a review as I had to wait for this chassis of course to test them, but now it's finally time. So for those who don't know, BOX Royals are tactile switches designed and manufactured by Kailh for NovelKeys to be extra tactile, which they achieved rather unconventionally by stiffening the contacts. It's a very interesting solution. Compared to other tactile box switches like brown and burnt orange, as you can see from these force curves, it has a much bigger tactile drop, more than twice as big at around 45 grams compared to about 20 for brown and burnt orange. It has the same characteristic two-stage drop, although you can't really notice this in the flesh, and a medium Steph weighting of 65 grams at the tactile bump, the same as box jade switches. The drop is numerically roughly equally as large as the ridiculously tactile box jade and navy switches, but because those are based on a click bar, the tactility of those switches is much sharper, less than half the length of that of the Royals. This is because the box Royals may use a novel stiffening method, but in terms of how they generate tactility, they're fundamentally the same as Cherry MX type tactile switches. It's a notch in the slider that rasps past the contacts. Previously, I've expressed my exasperation at the lack of tactility in notch type or MX-like tactile switches, most notoriously the 10-gram drop MX Brown, but also the much more tactile implementations of the same design, like the 30+ gram drop Zelios, which are a lot better but still feel linear at heart. So of course the big question is, do box Royals finally break that barrier and feel tactile? Well, it took me several weeks of testing before I could finally get my head around it, but I think I've finally got it nailed down now. The tactile bump in these switches actually feels quite sharp despite being a whole millimeter long. I suspect this is because the grams of force dropped per millimeter is still fairly high. When typing on it at speed, some of the tactility disappears, but even when doing this, the tactility is very significant. I had to do a lot of comparing to other switches to get a good perspective on this, but really there is no doubt that this is by far the most tactile MX-like switch I've ever tried. In view of this, it's no surprise that Mike reported some of his customers have complained that the tactility was actually too much for them, and genuinely, if you compare these side by side to, for example, MX Clears, the latter just feel absolutely linear. I mean, goddamn! Mike mentioned that they were meant to appeal to the customers who wanted a non-clicky version of box navy and jade switches, although I would say they don't feel quite the same. I've put in a few jade switches here to compare, and the sharpness of the tactility generated by the jade's click bar really makes it much more over the top. Here, I'll compare the two real quick. The interesting thing is that with the jades, you can actually feel the clicker in action slamming against the switch, whereas the Royals feel more like something kinks and gives way. It's somewhat comparable, definitely, but not the same. However, the box Royals have the tactile build-up right at the start, less than half a millimeter in, so it feels like the slider doesn't move at all before you build up enough force to make it move, and then it suddenly caves almost all the way in. The jade switches have more than twice as much travel before they start to go into lockdown mode, so in other words, they don't feel quite as digital as the Royals, even though they feel more tactile, if that makes any sense. So, is any of this actually any good? Well, I'm a bit in two minds about that. I'll be honest, at first I didn't really like them, but I couldn't say why, hence why I tested it for so long, to try and get a real, proper feel for them. And now that I have, I've actually grown to like them a fair bit, especially in the context of tactile designs. What I like about these most of all is that uniquely there is no sense of the linear component that's present in MX-like tactile designs. The tactility feels genuine, if a bit jarring maybe. Fun fact, a bunch of people have reported that the Royals actually turn clicky over time, and I can corroborate this as quite a few of my keys have done the same thing, but it's most noticeable on the A key, which makes sense as that's often the most used key on the keyboard in my experience. Specifically, what happens is that even if I press it slowly, there's a definitive sound coming out. It's not quite that super loud, I just have the microphone very close to the keyboard right now to show you what I'm talking about. In fact, I might not even have noticed it if someone hadn't pointed it out on GKAC, but I figure it's something Kailh and NovelKeys might want to look at. NovelKeys have been marketing them a fair bit. They even made a special logo for them, which they included in the package. They're honestly a big improvement over other MX-like tactile switches in my opinion, and if you like really tactile, non-clicky switches, you should definitely check them out. I'll be honest, I still prefer the type of tactility that clicky switch designs can afford over the notch type of tactility present in so many of these modern tactile switches, but as far as MX-like tactile designs go, I'd say these really stand out. It's just a shame they had to resort to a bump this giant to make a switch that doesn't feel linear at heart. Anyway, that's it for this review. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.